I've always been the kind of guy who believes in leaving a little early, getting home before dark, and just enjoying the quiet. So that Friday, I got home around 5:30, hoping we'd start the weekend with a family dinner, maybe some pizza and a movie with the kids. Pulling up, though, I saw an extra car in the driveway, a blue Honda Civic, one I didn't recognize. Right then, a cold, unsettled feeling crawled up my spine, the kind you get when you know something's about to go wrong but can't put your finger on what. I walked in, calling out for Sarah and the kids. Silence. Even the usual sounds of cartoons on the TV or the hum of the dishwasher were missing. Every step felt heavier as I moved through the empty house. I checked the kitchen, the dining room, the bedrooms, no one. Then, just as I was about to head into the den, I caught a glimpse through the back window. There they were. Out in the backyard, Sarah and Alex, our 20-something babysitter, laughing. And not just any laugh, it was that deep, personal kind of laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from her in a long time. I froze, watching as they leaned closer, their voices low, her hand on his arm, his on her shoulder. Before I could stop myself, I pushed the back door open and stepped out onto the deck. Their heads snapped up, and the sudden, guilty silence that followed was enough to tell me that whatever was going on, it wasn't just a friendly chat. The air between us hung in a silence that felt suffocating. I wanted to say something, but words failed me. Sarah and Alex stood there, and the look in her eyes, something I'd never seen before, made my chest tighten. She looked like a kid caught stealing from the cookie jar, except this was far from innocent. I clenched my fists, trying to keep myself calm, because my mind was racing in a dozen directions, trying to piece together how we'd gone from a normal Friday night to this. Sarah took a step forward, forcing a weak smile. "Hey, Jake, you're home early," she said, her voice too casual, too forced. She shot a quick, nervous glance at Alex, like she was hoping he'd disappear if she ignored him. He just stood there, silent, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes darting from her to me. His usual cocky confidence was gone, replaced by an awkward, nervous look that made me want to wipe it off his face. "I finished up early," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. It felt steady, controlled, totally out of sync with the chaos building up inside me. I took a slow look between the two of them, waiting for someone to explain why my wife and our babysitter were out here, standing too close, whispering, like they were sharing some secret I wasn't part of. "Alex was just, helping me with some backyard stuff," she stammered, waving a hand toward the flower bed. "You know how I wanted to get those planters ready for spring?" I stared at the flower bed she was pointing at. Not a single tool in sight, no evidence of any work being done. Just an excuse. A bad one. The worst part was the way she didn't even seem to believe it herself, she barely even tried. "Really?" I said, keeping my voice flat. "You needed help from the babysitter? That's why you're out here, alone?" Alex's eyes were glued to the ground now, and he muttered something that was probably meant to sound like an apology. I could feel a surge of anger bubbling up, but I forced it down, refusing to let him see any reaction. "Alex," I said, my voice coming out sharp enough to make him jump. "You can leave now." He looked at Sarah, as if waiting for her permission to go, which only irritated me more. She gave him a small nod, and without another word, he practically sprinted back to the house. I stood there, watching him leave, my fists clenching and unclenching, trying to keep myself together as I turned back to Sarah. She forced a smile. "Jake, it's not what you think," she began, that desperate tone already creeping into her voice. "We were just—" "I don't want to hear it," I snapped. "Not another lie, Sarah. Not one more." Her face fell, and she bit her lip, looking at the ground. For the first time in years, I saw her clearly. It was like my mind had snapped awake, and I was seeing the pieces I'd ignored, or maybe pretended not to see, for months. The late nights. The last-minute excuses. The phone she kept clutched to her side like it held the secrets of the universe. How many times had she walked in late, brushing me off with some flimsy excuse I'd swallowed because I didn't want to face the possibility that maybe, just maybe, something was wrong? "Jake, listen," she started, stepping closer, reaching out, but I stepped back. I wasn't ready to let her close. She stopped, biting her lip, and the look in her eyes shifted from worry to frustration, like I was the one being unreasonable. It's not fair for you to jump to conclusions, she said, her voice a mix of anger and desperation.
You don't know what's going on. Then why don't you tell me?
I shot back, my tone harsher than I intended. Tell me why our babysitter is hanging around here after hours, laughing with you in our backyard when I'm not home.
Explain that to me, Sarah.
She flinched, as if I'd hit her, but she didn't say anything. For a second, I thought I saw guilt flash across her face, but she buried it quickly, crossing her arms and lifting her chin. Jake, you're being paranoid, she said, her voice cold now.
This is exactly why I didn't want to say anything. You always overreact.
I stared at her, stunned.
Overreact? She was standing here, alone with some guy half her age, in our backyard, after lying to me about it, and I was the one overreacting?
Don't turn this around on me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper.
I'm not the one who's been sneaking around, hiding things. I trusted you, Sarah. I trusted you completely.
She scoffed, rolling her eyes.
You're making it sound like some big conspiracy. He's just a kid, Jake. That's not the point, and you know it, I shot back. The point is, you lied to me. The point is, you were out here with him, and you didn't want me to see it. If it was so innocent, why are you acting like you got caught? Her face hardened, and I could see her scrambling to come up with something, anything, that might make me let this go. But I wasn't about to let it go. Not this time.
Look, she said finally, dropping her arms.
Alex, he's just going through some stuff, okay? And I was just being there for him.
I didn't think I had to check with you before offering someone a little kindness. There it was, the excuse.
Wrapped up in just enough innocence to make it seem plausible.
And maybe, just maybe, if I hadn't seen the way she looked at him, I would have bought it. Maybe I would have swallowed it whole, the way I'd swallowed all the other excuses she'd fed me these past months. I let out a long breath, feeling my anger drain away, replaced by something colder. I knew, in that moment, that this was more than just a misunderstanding. Whatever was going on, she had chosen to hide it from me. She had made that choice, over and over, and I'd been the fool who chose to trust her. Just tell me the truth, Sarah, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper.
How long has this been going on?
Her face paled, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She just stared at me, her hands twisting together, and in that silence, I got my answer. It felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. I stood there, staring at the woman I'd shared my life with, the woman I trusted completely, and I felt nothing but emptiness.
I couldn't even bring myself to feel angry anymore. I just felt numb.
Without another word, I turned and walked back inside, leaving her standing there. As I closed the door behind me, I realized something that hit me harder than any of her excuses or lies. This was over. Whatever trust, whatever love I'd had, was gone. And I wasn't sure I could ever get it back. I shut the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment, taking in the empty silence of the house. The numbness was wearing off, replaced by a rage that had been building up from the moment I saw them outside. The anger wasn't just about what she'd done but about the way she'd tried to cover it up. I pushed off from the door, walking into the kitchen, my mind running through everything I needed to say, every demand I wanted to make. I wasn't leaving anything unsaid this time. Sarah walked in a minute later, her face pale, her expression guarded. She looked at me, hesitating in the doorway like she was debating whether to even come in.
But I wasn't giving her a choice.
Sit down, I said, my voice cold, as I pointed to the chair across the table. She swallowed, and for a split second, I saw fear in her eyes before she took the seat, folding her hands in her lap. I sat down across from her, keeping my gaze steady. She tried to avoid my eyes, looking down at the table, then glancing up, but never meeting my stare for more than a second. I waited, letting the silence press down on her until she finally couldn't stand it. Jake. I don't know what you think you saw, but... Cut the crap, Sarah, I interrupted. I don't want another excuse, and I'm done with lies.
You've been hiding something from me for months, haven't you?
Her mouth opened, then closed. She seemed to be struggling with what to say, and for the first time in a long time, I could see her wrestling with the truth, caught between telling me what I wanted to hear and clinging to whatever story she thought might save her.
I haven't
been hiding anything, she said, her voice trembling. You're just seeing things that aren't there, Jake.
That's not good enough, I said, my tone steady. I don't need you to play games with me. I need you to tell me exactly what's been going on with you and Alex.
Her hands twisted together, her gaze finally meeting mine with a mixture of anger and desperation.
There's nothing to tell, Jake. He's just a kid, someone I was trying to help. He's going through a tough time, and he needed someone to talk to.
Funny, I didn't see much talking out there, I replied. You were laughing with him, whispering, looking at him in a way you haven't looked at me in years.
If it's so innocent, why are you out there with him alone, hiding from me? Why are you lying?
Because you don't understand, she snapped, her voice rising, her eyes flashing with something I couldn't quite read.
You don't know what it's been like, feeling like I can't talk to you, like I'm just existing here, like nothing I say matters anymore. Then why not tell me that? I shot back. Why lie to my face? Why sneak around behind my back?
If you had a problem with our marriage, if you felt ignored or lonely or whatever else, why not just tell me?
Why go to him?
Her face crumpled, and she looked away, the anger draining from her expression, replaced by something that almost looked like regret. She sat in silence, her shoulders slumping, as if the fight had gone out of her. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper.
I didn't plan for it to happen, she said, looking down at her hands. I didn't go looking for anything with him. It just happened.
I felt the anger boil over at that, a surge of rage that had me gripping the edge of the table, fighting the urge to yell, to throw something, to do anything that would release the fury building inside me.
It just happened? I repeated, my voice tight. That's your answer? You just accidentally fell into his arms, or what? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you knew exactly what you were doing. You knew what you were risking, and you chose to do it anyway.
She flinched, her face contorting with a mix of anger and shame.
It wasn't like that. I didn't mean to hurt you, Jake. I don't know. I got carried away.
It was stupid, and it was wrong, and I'm sorry.
Sorry?
I scoffed, the word tasting bitter in my mouth.
You're sorry now? After all the lies, the sneaking around, you think sorry is enough? Do you even realize what you've done to me? To us?
Her face crumpled, and she looked down, her hands twisting together as if she was trying to hold herself together.
I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But it's not like we actually.
I stared at her, the realization sinking in.
You're seriously going to sit here and tell me you never crossed that line? After everything I've seen, after the way you looked at him, you expect me to believe that?
She hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to come up with an answer. Finally, she shook her head, her voice trembling.
It never went that far.
I swear, Jake.
It was just emotional. I don't know why, but I
felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, and I got caught up in it.
But I would never have taken it that far.
I felt a strange, hollow sense of relief at her words, but it was quickly drowned out by the anger that had been simmering inside me. Whether or not she'd crossed a physical line didn't change the fact that she'd betrayed me, that she'd chosen someone else over me, over our family. I don't know if I believe you, I said finally, my voice cold.
But at this point, I don't even think it matters. You lied to me, Sarah. You went behind my back, and you threw everything we built together away.
You chose him over me, over our kids, over everything. She flinched at that, her face contorting with pain, but I didn't feel any sympathy for her. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Jake, please, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper.
I know I messed up, but can't we at least try to fix this? Can't we try to make things right?
I stared at her, the woman I loved, the woman I trusted more than anyone, and I felt nothing but cold anger and disappointment. She was asking me to forgive her, to let it all go, as if the past few months hadn't happened, as if she hadn't betrayed me.
Why should I? I asked, my voice low. Why should I give you another chance after what you did? After all the lies, all the sneaking around?
You threw away everything we had for a fling with a kid half your age.
And now you want me to just forget about it? To pretend like none of this happened?
She swallowed, her face crumpling as she struggled to hold back tears.
I don't know what to say. I'm sorry, Jake. I don't have an excuse. I don't have a reason. I just want to make things right.
I shook my head, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me.
I don't think you can. I don't think anything you say or do will ever change what you've done. You broke my trust, Sarah. And I don't think I'll ever be able to get that back.
She sat there, her face pale, her hands trembling, and I could see the realization sinking in. She knew she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, that she'd done something that couldn't be fixed or forgiven.
Jake, please, she whispered, reaching out across the table. Just give me a chance. Let me show you I can be better. Let me show you that I'm still the woman you married.
I looked at her hand, at the desperation in her eyes, and I felt a pang of sadness, of regret, for the life we'd shared, for the love that had once been there. But it was gone now, replaced by anger, by betrayal, by a hollow emptiness that I didn't know if I'd ever be able to fill.
You're not the woman I married, I said, my voice cold. The woman I married would never have done this to me. The woman I married would never have lied to me, never have betrayed me like this. That woman is gone, Sarah. And I don't know if she's ever coming back.
She stared at me, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock and pain, and I knew then that this was the end. There was no going back, no fixing what she'd broken. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. I stood up, pushing the chair back, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me, the realization that my life was never going to be the same, that everything I thought I knew was a lie. Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there, alone with her regret, with her shame, with the mess she'd made of our lives. As I reached the door, I paused, glancing back one last time. She was crying, her face buried in her hands, but I didn't feel any sympathy. This was her doing, her choice, and now she had to live with it. I turned away, leaving her behind, knowing that whatever we'd had was gone, shattered beyond repair. The days after that confrontation were a blur. I walked around the house like a stranger, barely speaking, just watching as everything I thought was solid and real unraveled in front of me. Sarah's presence in the house grated on me, a constant reminder of what she'd done. She tried to talk to me, tried to apologize, but I ignored her. I didn't want her words, her guilt, her shame. None of it would fix what she'd done. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't just leave it like this. I couldn't just let her get away with everything she'd done, as if a simple apology could wipe away the betrayal, the lies. She'd ruined our life, shattered my trust, and I wasn't going to let her come out of this unscathed. I decided I needed to hurt her the way she'd hurt me, to make her understand what it felt like to have your life ripped apart by the person you trusted most. I wasn't going to play fair. She'd already shown me she didn't respect me enough to be honest, so I didn't know her a thing. I spent hours in our bedroom, combing through files, old receipts, anything I could find that might work to my advantage. I came across records of our finances, property deeds, insurance policies, even old text messages and emails we'd shared over the years. I knew our finances well enough to know what I could use against her, what would hurt her the most. The first step was the house. It was in my name only, a detail she'd brushed off when we bought it years ago because she'd trusted me completely. Now, that trust she once claimed was hers alone to give was going to cost her. I went to a lawyer, arranged everything, and prepared the papers. All I had to do was sign, and the house would legally be mine. I could evict her any time I wanted, and she wouldn't be able to do a thing about it. But that was just the beginning. I needed more. I needed her to understand that every part of the life she thought she could keep in her back pocket, every comfort, every convenience, was slipping out of her control. While I was at the lawyer's, I asked him about filing for sole custody of the kids. I had no intention of actually taking them away from her, but I wanted her to see the threat, to feel the fear of losing her children. I wanted her to understand that her actions had consequences she hadn't thought of when she'd thrown everything away for some cheap thrill. The next part of my plan took some careful planning. I remembered how often she'd spoken about wanting a fresh start or how she joked about moving somewhere far away where no one knew her. She hadn't realized, of course, that I was listening, that those little comments would come back to haunt her. I called in favors with a few friends in town, letting them know that Sarah was interested in selling, moving, and leaving our past behind. I didn't tell her anything, of course. I just let the rumors simmer, knowing they'd get back to her soon enough. The look on her face when she started getting calls from friends, offering her support and asking her when she planned to move, was priceless. She came to me, practically begging to know what I'd said, who I'd spoken to, but I played dumb. She was starting to feel the walls close in, and I wanted her to know just how it felt to be blindsided, to lose control over something she thought she owned. And then there was Alex. I knew I had to deal with him, too, to make sure he understood what he'd done, to make sure he felt the weight of his actions. I hadn't confronted him since that day in the backyard, but now I was ready. I wanted him to know that the time he'd spent with my wife, the thrill he'd enjoyed at my expense, was coming with a price he hadn't counted on. I found him at the gym one evening, cornering him in the locker room as he was packing up to leave. He looked up, startled, and for a second I saw real fear in his eyes. Good. I wanted him to be afraid. I wanted him to understand that he wasn't going to walk away from this without consequences. You think you can just come into my home, into my life, and take what you want? I said, my voice low, controlled, but laced with the anger I'd been holding back. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. Save it. I don't want your apologies. I don't want your excuses. I just want you to understand that you're not welcome here. You're not welcome near my family, my house, or anything that belongs to me. He tried to stammer something about not meaning for things to go that far, but I didn't care. I didn't care about his regrets or his excuses. He was just a kid, out of his depth, but that didn't excuse what he'd done. You messed with the wrong family, I said, taking a step closer, forcing him to back up until he hit the wall behind him. Stay away from my house, my wife, my kids. If I see you anywhere near them again, you'll regret it. Understand? He nodded, looking pale, his bravado crumbling. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him, but that pity vanished as quickly as it came. He'd made his choices, and now he had to live with them. But I wasn't done with him yet. A few days later, I went to his apartment. I left a printed photo on his doorstep, taken from our home security footage, of him and Sarah in the backyard. There was no caption, no note, just the photo. I wanted him to see it every time he left his apartment, to feel that constant reminder that someone was watching him, that he hadn't gotten away with anything. Back at home, I ramped things up with Sarah. I started locking her out of our joint accounts, transferring money into my own name, changing passwords. Every day she tried to access something that had once been a part of our shared life, and every day she found another door slammed shut. She finally came to me one night, after another failed attempt to log into the bank account, her face pale, her voice shaking with frustration and anger. "What are you doing, Jake?" she demanded, her voice barely holding steady. "Why are you locking me out of everything? I still live here, too. I'm still the mother of your children. You lost the right to any of this the day you decided to lie to me," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You wanted to keep secrets, so now I'm keeping everything else. You don't get to play the victim here, Sarah. You made your choice, and now you're facing the consequences." She stared at me, her face contorting with anger and desperation, but she didn't argue. She knew she'd lost, knew she had no leverage, no power. She was trapped, just like I'd been trapped by her lies, her betrayal. The final step was one I'd planned carefully, one that would drive home the reality of what she'd done. I printed out copies of everything I'd found, her text messages, photos, all the little pieces of evidence that showed just how far she'd gone to keep her secret. I put them in an envelope, sealed it, and left it on the kitchen counter, knowing she'd find it. When she opened it, I watched from the hallway as her face went pale, her hands shaking as she realized what was inside. She looked up, her eyes wide with shock, with horror, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes.
What is this?" she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "It's everything," I said calmly. "Everything you've been hiding, everything you thought you could keep secret. I'm not keeping your lies for you anymore, Sarah. If you want to lie, if you want to keep secrets, then you can do it alone." She looked down at the envelope, her face contorted with fear and shame, and I knew I'd gotten through to her. She was finally seeing what she'd done, finally facing the reality of her actions. And for the first time, I felt a sense of satisfaction, a sense of closure. But it wasn't enough. I wasn't done yet. I took copies of that envelope, sent them to her parents, her siblings, even a few of her close friends. I wanted them all to know what she'd done, to see the truth she'd tried to hide. I wanted her to face the judgment, the shame, from everyone she'd lied to, from everyone she thought she could fool. By the end of it, I'd taken everything from her, her reputation, her friends, her comfort. She was left with nothing but the consequences of her choices, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. She'd finally felt the pain, the betrayal, the devastation she'd caused, and she had no one to blame but herself. As I watched her crumble, I knew my revenge was complete. Over the next few days, I kept my distance, watching from the sidelines as Sarah's world closed in on her. I'd made my point, made her see the depth of my anger and disappointment, and I wasn't planning to ease up. But I could see the toll it was taking on her, the way she'd stopped bothering with appearances or keeping up the usual front she wore. Her parents had called her, her sister too, and I could hear bits of those conversations through the walls. Their voices were tense, full of questions and disappointment. The life she'd built around her, the support network she'd taken for granted, was starting to crumble, just like my trust had. Every time I looked at her, I expected to feel satisfaction, maybe even triumph. But it was different now. Seeing her drained, her face lined with regret, I felt something I hadn't expected, a strange, empty sadness. I thought about the years we'd spent together, the memories, the plans we'd made, and I couldn't shake the sense of loss. It wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about the life we'd shared, the dreams I'd had, the family we'd built together. I realized that as much as I wanted to hurt her, I was hurting too. I knew I couldn't keep things in this limbo forever. The kids were noticing the tension, picking up on the silence that had taken over the house. They didn't know the details, but they knew something had changed. And I couldn't just let them watch us destroy each other day by day. One evening, I decided it was time. Time to lay it all out, to face the reality of what our life had turned into and figure out where to go from here. After the kids were in bed, I found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her phone. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and exhaustion. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and I realized she was probably as miserable as I was. "Sarah," I said, my voice low, steady. "We need to talk." She nodded, putting her phone down, bracing herself. "I know." I sat across from her, the same place where we'd had our first confrontation, but this time, the anger that had fueled me was gone. All I felt was tired, the weight of everything pressing down on me. "I think we both know there's no going back," I started, my voice calm. "What you did, it broke something between us, something I don't think can ever be fixed." She swallowed, her eyes filling with tears, but she didn't look away. "I know I messed up, Jake. I know I ruined everything. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything anymore." Her words hit me harder than I'd expected. There was a finality in her voice, a resignation that told me she understood the depth of what she'd done. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her, but I pushed that feeling aside. This wasn't about pity or forgiveness. It was about facing the reality of what our life had become. "I don't know how we're supposed to move forward," I said, my voice steady. "But I know I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." She looked down, her hands twisting together, and for the first time, I saw real regret in her eyes. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I know I hurt you, Jake. I know I destroyed the life we had. But I swear, I never wanted this. I never wanted to lose you." "Then why do it?" I asked, the question coming out sharper than I'd intended. "Why go behind my back? Why lie? Why throw everything away for what, Sarah? What was it all for? She took a shaky breath, her hands clenching together as if she was trying to hold herself together. I don't know, she said finally, her voice trembling. I guess. I felt like I was losing myself. Like I was stuck in a life I didn't recognize anymore. And then, he came along, and I thought maybe I could find some part of myself I'd lost. I know it sounds stupid, and I know it doesn't make sense, but that's the truth. I shook my head, unable to understand how she could be so selfish, so blind to what she was risking. So you thought risking everything we'd built, everything we had, was worth it? You thought throwing away our life, our family, was a fair trade? She didn't answer right away. She just sat there, her face pale, her eyes hollow. I didn't think it through. I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late. And now I'm paying the price. There was a part of me that wanted to push her, to make her feel every ounce of the pain she'd caused me. But another part, the part that had loved her for so many years, just wanted to let it go, to move on from the anger and the bitterness and find some kind of peace. So what now? I asked, my voice quiet. Where do we go from here? She looked down, her hands trembling, and I could see the fear in her eyes. I don't know, she whispered. I don't want to lose you, Jake. I don't want to lose our family. But I know I don't deserve a second chance. You're right, I said, my voice steady. You don't. The words hung between us, heavy and final. She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She just sat there, letting the weight of her choices settle around her. I guess that's it, then, she said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. I guess, we're done. I looked at her, the woman I'd built a life with, the woman I trusted more than anyone, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. It was over. The life we'd shared, the future we'd planned, it was all gone. But for the first time since I'd discovered her betrayal, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of closure. I'll talk to the lawyer, I said, my voice steady. We'll work out the details, figure out what's best for the kids. But as far as I'm concerned, we're done. She nodded, her shoulders slumping, and I knew she understood. There was no more fighting, no more begging for forgiveness. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with them. We sat in silence for a while, both of us lost in our own thoughts, the weight of our decisions settling around us. It was strange, realizing that this was the end, that the life we'd built was over. But it was also a relief, a chance to finally move on from the pain and the anger and find a new path. After a few minutes, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness. I just want you to know. I'm sorry, Jake. I'm so sorry for everything. I nodded, acknowledging her words, but I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We both knew that sorry wasn't enough, that it couldn't fix what she'd broken. She stood up, hesitating for a moment as if she wanted to say more, but she didn't. She just gave me one last, long look, her eyes filled with regret, and then she turned and walked out of the room. I watched her go, feeling a strange sense of finality, of closure. She was gone, and with her, the life we'd shared. It was over. There was no going back, no fixing what she'd broken. And for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. As I sat there in the empty kitchen, I realized that I didn't hate her. I didn't feel anger or bitterness or resentment. I just felt empty. She'd taken so much from me, so much of my trust, my love, my sense of security. But she hadn't taken everything. I still had my kids, my friends, the life I could rebuild without her. And I knew that, in time, I'd be okay. When I finally stood up and walked out of the kitchen, I knew I was ready to move forward. The life I'd once known was gone, but a new life was waiting, a life where I could find peace, happiness, maybe even love again. It would take time, but I was ready to start that journey. Ready to let go of the anger, the pain, and build something new. That was the last conversation we had, the last time I saw the woman I'd once loved, the woman who'd betrayed me. And as I walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. The pain, the lies, the betrayal, all of it was behind me. For the first time in months, I felt free. The first week after that last conversation felt like I was living in someone else's skin. I moved through my days like a machine, taking care of the kids, going to work, handling the details of the divorce with a calm I didn't quite understand. But underneath it all, I could feel a simmering mixture of loss, regret, and relief. When Sarah packed up her things and left, I felt like I should be relieved. But watching her car pull away with half of our life boxed up in the back seat left a pit in my stomach that stayed with me long after she was gone. The kids asked questions, of course. They wanted to know why Mom was leaving, what would happen next. I did my best to explain it in simple terms, to reassure them that we both loved them, that it wasn't their fault, but nothing I said seemed to make it any easier for them. They clung to me more than usual, needing reassurance that I was still there, still a constant in their lives. I did my best to be that constant, but I knew they sensed the tension, the pain simmering just below the surface. Some days, it felt like the whole situation was surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. I found myself replaying moments from our marriage in my head, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong, if there had been signs I'd missed, red flags I'd ignored. I went over everything I could remember, from the first time we'd met to the day I'd caught her in the backyard with Alex, but I couldn't pinpoint a single moment that explained how we'd ended up here. It was like trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. In a way, I think I was looking for something to blame, some concrete reason I could point to and say, this is why. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was no single reason, no simple explanation that could sum up everything that had gone wrong. It was 1,000 tiny cracks, each one too small to notice on its own, but together, they'd shattered everything we'd built. One evening, a couple of weeks after she'd left, I found myself sitting in the quiet house, the kids asleep upstairs, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the empty kitchen. I stared at the divorce papers on the table, the legal jargon blending together into a blur of words that seemed meaningless compared to the reality they represented. A final, legal end to everything we'd built together, everything we'd once promised to each other. As I sat there, I felt an overwhelming urge to get out, to clear my head. I grabbed my jacket and my keys and headed outside, walking aimlessly through the neighborhood, letting the cool night air wash over me. The streets were quiet, the houses dark, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. There was no noise, no anger, no bitterness, just the quiet realization that this was my life now. I was on my own, responsible for my kids, for my future, for rebuilding a life that had been ripped apart. I kept walking, my mind wandering through memories, plans I'd once made, dreams that now felt hollow. But as I walked, I started to feel something else, a faint glimmer of hope. It was small, barely a spark, but it was there, a reminder that my life wasn't over, that I still had the chance to build something new, something better. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I got the kids ready for school, made breakfast, went through the motions with a kind of quiet determination that felt right. I realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life haunted by what had happened, by the choices Sarah had made, by the pain she'd caused. I wanted to move forward, to build a life that was worth living, a life that didn't revolve around bitterness or regret. I took small steps at first, things that seemed almost trivial but felt like they meant something. I started cleaning out the house, getting rid of things that reminded me of her, of us. I reorganized the kids' rooms, helped them make small changes that made them feel more at home in this new, fractured version of our family. I changed up the living room, bought a new couch, repainted the walls. I needed things to feel different, to look different, to remind me that I was moving forward, not stuck in the past. One afternoon, I got a call from an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. He'd heard about the divorce, offered his support, and invited me out for a drink. Normally, I would have brushed it off, made an excuse, but this time, I accepted. I needed the break, needed to feel like I was a person outside of this broken marriage, outside of the pain that had consumed me. We met at a quiet bar, talked about old times, caught up on life. I told him about the divorce, about everything that had happened, and he listened without judgment, without pity. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again, like I was more than just the man whose wife had cheated, more than the guy who'd been betrayed. As we talked, he gave me some advice that stuck with me. He told me that pain was inevitable, that we couldn't control what others did to us, but we could control how we responded to it. He told me that holding on to anger, holding on to bitterness, would only hurt me in the end,
that I had to find a way to let it go if I wanted to move on. I thought about his words a lot in the days that followed. I realized that he was right, that if I wanted to find any kind of peace, I had to let go of the anger, the need for revenge, the desire to make her pay. She'd made her choices, and she was dealing with the consequences. I didn't need to keep punishing myself by holding on to the resentment. Letting go wasn't easy. There were days when I'd catch myself replaying old arguments in my head, thinking about what I could have done differently, what I could have said to make her understand. But I forced myself to push those thoughts aside, to remind myself that the past was behind me, that I couldn't change what had happened, only how I responded to it. With time, things started to get easier. I spent more time with the kids, focused on being there for them, on building a stable, happy life for them in the midst of all the changes. I found myself reconnecting with friends, spending more time outside, rediscovering parts of myself that I'd let go of over the years. I realized that I didn't have to be defined by what had happened, that I could choose to move forward, to find happiness, to build something new. A few months after Sarah left, I took the kids on a trip, just the three of us. We went to a cabin by the lake, spent the days fishing, hiking, exploring. It was simple, nothing extravagant, but it felt like a fresh start, a chance to create new memories that weren't tied to the past. Watching them laugh, seeing the joy in their faces, I felt a sense of contentment that I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, I could see a future, a life that was worth living, even without her. And as I sat by the lake that evening, watching the kids skip stones, I realized something that had been building inside me for a while. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't feel anger, or resentment, or bitterness. I just felt free. She was a part of my past, a chapter that had ended, but I didn't need to carry that weight with me anymore. I could let it go, move on, and start building something new, something that was mine. The divorce finalized a few weeks later. It was simple, almost anticlimactic, just a series of signatures and a few legal formalities. She didn't fight for custody, didn't contest the settlement, and I think we both knew that dragging things out wouldn't change anything. It was over. Officially, legally, and emotionally, we were done. Afterward, I took the kids out for ice cream, celebrating this quiet end to a painful chapter. They didn't understand the significance, didn't realize why I was smiling, but I felt a weight lift, a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. It was over, and I was ready to move forward. Looking back now, I can see that I learned something valuable from all of this. I learned that pain is inevitable, that betrayal cuts deep, but I also learned that healing is possible. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can rebuild, that I can find happiness even in the aftermath of heartbreak. And I learned that forgiveness isn't about the other person, it's about finding peace within yourself, letting go of the anger, and choosing to move forward. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. I've started to rebuild, to find joy in the small moments, to reconnect with the people who matter. And I know that whatever comes next, I'm ready for it. I'm not defined by what she did to me, by the pain she caused. I'm defined by how I chose to respond, by the life I'm building now, by the man I'm becoming. As I sit here, watching the kids play, I realize that I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I'm ready for whatever comes next, ready to embrace this new chapter with open arms. And for the first time, I know that I'll be just fine.